Hi, listeners. I am so excited today because we have Dr. Robin Stern on the podcast. She's the co founder and associate director of the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence. She's an author, a speaker, and a licensed psychoanalyst with 30 years' experience. Dr. Stern coined the phrase Gaslight Effect in her book in 2007, and most recently, she is the host of the Gaslight Effect podcast. So, at the beginning of each episode, Heather and I check in on how we're feeling using the mood meter. Well, guess what? Dr. Stern is the co creator of it. So, I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to her.
When I was growing up, and you're younger than I am, so you may not know the Shirley Temple movies. Do you know
Oh,
Shirley?
yes.
Okay.
I do know Shirley Temple movies. Yeah.
So my mother on Saturdays sat me in front of Shirley Temple movies, and while she did, I don't know what, but it was a good thing because I watched these movies week after week, and I was really fascinated by and compelled by the fact that she could help people talk to each other just by being kind and loving.
Mm.
And that the promise of connectedness and love was so much of what she was about. And her little being was about being loving and being positive and optimistic. And I thought that really is the way I want to be when I grow up.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when people say, well, who were your early role models? She, as a child actress, was an early role model. And so much so that when I got my PhD and I started to work, I wrote her a letter. And at the time, she didn't respond, but whoever it was working with her responded and said she's unable to respond. But I
Okay.
just wanted her to know that you never know when you're going to impact someone, and that the the fact that her love and kindness, then kindness between people and getting people to talk to each other, was what intrigued me as a child, was came to my mind as you were talking, because I didn't get it. I didn't get when people were mean to each other. And it wasn't just that I didn't like it. I thought, why do they have to do that?
Yeah.
Why can't they instead just be kind and have a conversation? Why can't they just say what they think or what they feel and have a conversation? Why
Yeah.
why do people have to be mean? So I never really, still don't understand it, even though as a psychoanalyst, of course, I understand it, but I just don't understand it. It's so much nicer and promotes so much more well-being, and everyone feels better when you
Yeah.
are kind and loving.
Absolutely. Well, that sort of is a good segue into one of the questions that I guess I had for you is what drew you into this career, I guess, being a psychoanalyst. And did that come first before you developed the center?
So way before, because I
Yeah.
was a kid at that time, and then I went on to then study psychology. Not a
Yeah.
surprise, when I was in college. But at that time, I was also very interested in relationships, and sadly, I thought that my parents' marriage was not that great,
Mm-hmm.
and or not the kind of marriage that I wish that they had had,
Okay.
because while they were loving on the one hand to each other, always to me, but to each other, they also were very critical of each other,
Mm,
and sometimes not so nice. So it was kind of binary, either loving or not so nice. And there was
got it.
no, it just didn't feel like something that I wish for people or for myself at the time. So I thought I want to be a divorce lawyer and fix that for people.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I studied the psychology, thinking that that's where I was going to end up. But in order to major in psychology, I went to NYU. I had to do all these internships at hospitals and work with patients. And then I had to interview lawyers and see what their job was all about. And in that process, I realized, no, 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 that's not what I want to do. I want to do the sitting with patients part, and the
Right.
sitting with people and hearing their stories and helping them get out of their own way, and figuring out what's going on. And so that's what I did. I then got a master's at the New School for Social Research graduate faculty in social psychology and personality development, and then went on to get a PhD at NYU. Then my kids, I had got married, had children,
Mm-hmm.
and when my kids went to school, I began to think, who's in front of the room teaching them?
Mm.
And like, what kind of training have they had to deal with kids when they're upset? Deal
Right.
with things that are happening, deal with divorces, things like that. And so I began to look for people who were working at the intersection of education
Mm.
and psychology. And around that time, I had done my own doctoral work on social intelligence, and just read Dan Goleman's book
Yes.
at the time, and called him
Okay.
because Shirley Temple was my model. So you could just call leaders of countries. Why can't you call Dan Goleman?
Right. Of course.
Right. So it was 90. So in 1990, Peter Salovey, who's now the
Yes.
president of Yale, of course, coined the term. And then
Yes.
95, Dan Goleman published the book on
Right.
emotional intelligence. And amazingly enough, Dan called me back. And so we have known each other since that time. But I then worked in a number of different organizations, at NYU, at Columbia, began to do some consulting uh, in the school at Columbia University. Was run by a colleague of mine, Gardner Dunnan, and Gardner was an amazing educator, had been the head of the Dalton School in New York, which is a wonderful private school. And he was very forward thinking. And so he
Mm-hmm.
said to me, you know what, that emotional intelligence stuff that you've been talking about, why don't you come in here and be a consultant and coach some of our faculty in emotional intelligence, particularly the faculty who may have some issues that we spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, sure, why don't I do that? And so during those years, then I was invited to go to the Garrison Institute, which is an institute that brings mindfulness into all areas of life. And I was invited because I was working at Columbia. We were doing leadership work, and at that same retreat, Mark Brackett was there.
Oh, okay. I was
And
waiting for this connection. Yes.
right. So it was totally serendipity, meant to be. In fact, the whole story that I'll tell you, just because I like you and I'm enjoying this, and I feel like we're friends already. So Dan Goleman had been invited to that retreat, and he could not go, and so I took his place. Not that
Oh,
I take Dan's place, but there was a spot, and so I was
yes.
able to go to a retreat that I was not initially going to. And
Okay.
so it was definitely meant to be. And so on that retreat, I met Mark Brackett. And
Okay.
he talked about his ruler approach to emotional intelligence. I recognized something in it that I hadn't seen in anybody else's approach. And at that point, I had worked in an organization dedicated to emotional intelligence in schools at Columbia. But what Mark's program offered that no one else did was a very discreet look at emotions,
Yes.
and also a focus on training the adults who touch the lives
Mm.
of children. So there are these wonderful programs out there, and there are wonderful programs, and they all train the adults to work with the kids. Our approach starts with the adults developing their own skills of emotional intelligence, so that they
Yes.
are, back to the earlier part of our conversation, they are the models
Right.
and the teachers.
And so you said the ruler, Mark already had the ruler approach. Was the mood meter tied into it at that point, or did the mood meter come after? Because I want to say, so our listeners will be familiar with this. Heather and I have been starting off our podcasts using the mood meter. We talk about, how's your mood today? How are you feeling? And it's been, I don't know, for me in my own life, even like you said, like having coaches, having people working, they need to have their own awareness. So it's been a game changer for me using the mood meter because there's things that you just wouldn't realize if you haven't taken a step back. And this is one of my questions for you. And I was going to say, even just knowing that I'm going to track my mood, it has this unintentional benefit in that I then all of a sudden take a step back. I'm
Yeah.
able to maybe reframe something that I'm doing and to maybe even just observe it curiously, right? Like as an emotion scientist, not an emotion judge. And so you can tell me, is that an unintentional benefit? Is that part of it? Do you find that with yourself? And I guess I'm curious, how often do you do your mood meter? And I notice I think the app has changed, right? Because now it's
The app has changed. It's called How We Feel.
how we feel. I
So
have that. I have that. Yeah. So I'm just going to tell you today how mine is, and I don't know if you've done yours today, Robin. So we had been using the regular mood meter one, and now it is the one with the little heart. I'm going to
that's
just
right.
put that up in my thing. So cute little. Anyway, so I'm going to show you. So that one was mine, and so what mine was today. Mine came up, of course, it's in the quadrant. It's the top right quadrant with yellow. And I got eager because I was very eager to talk to you today and pick your brain and so excited to have you on the podcast. So I think that's what mine was about.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to tell you the story of when I got to the center. There was ruler, the ruler approach, and at that time we had three tools. We had the charter, the mood meter, and the blueprint.
Okay.
And I, along with Mark, developed a tool called the meta moment
Okay.
that became our fourth tool because Mark and I, coming from different orientations, as a researcher, me as a clinician, were always interested in what's the motivation for someone to do this work?
Mm,
What's the motivation for someone to take a different perspective like we do in the blueprint, to consider how somebody else is feeling, to be empathic? And for me, that motivation was not just because I want to have a good relationship with you, but I want to be a better partner. I
right.
want to be the best I can be. I want to enter. I want to be somebody who is after well-being for myself. And I
Yes.
want to be productive and I want to approach whatever purpose and meaning seeking I'm looking for in my life to my fullest potential. I want to work to my fullest potential. In order to work to my fullest potential, I want to be the best I can be. And so we took this concept that I'd been thinking about that at the time was called the intervening moment, and
Okay.
we brought it into school language, language that would appeal to children as well as adults, and we called it the meta moment.
Oh,
So our meta moment is a tool that helps you. It's values based. It's aligned with your values, and it's a tool that helps you to prolong the moment between when you're triggered and when you.
mm,
And what's different about the meta moment than just taking a deep breath, which we do encourage, it's the beginning of the meta moment, it's the first step or the second step after you notice there's something going on, um, is that you invoke an image of your best self.
okay.
So, this image of your best self or this name of your best self is something that you can develop at a time where you're not in the middle of needing to take a meta moment, right? And we think of it as your best self is a combination of the best person, your most ideal person you want to be, and the person you ideally want people to see.
Mm,
So it's you at your ideal and your reputational self. And
okay.
when you come up with the adjectives for each one of those, you'll look and notice that probably there's something that is overlapping. And that overlapping adjective, for example,
Right.
let's say it's kindness, that
Yes.
whether you are being your ideal self or people are talking about you, how do you want to be spoken about? How do you want people to see you and experience you? For me, one of those adjectives would definitely be kind.
Okay.
And for myself, I want to be kind. And so that would be a core part of my best self. And so then we had these four tools, the charter, which helps people to come to the table with how they want to feel
Mm,
when they are in a meeting, or let's say you do a charter for that group, or in a classroom, we have school charters in each classroom, or how I want to feel in this meeting. Like if we
yeah.
wrote a charter, we would all talk about what are the feelings we want to have together during our meeting today. And we come up
Right.
with those feelings, and then we would say, okay, so what will we do to ensure that that happens for all of us? Right. The specific behaviors. And once you have that safety in the room, because you're saying, okay, I know that we're all going to engage in these behaviors, we sign the agreement, then you can go onto the mood meter and say, okay, so
Mm,
how do you feel?
okay.
So you
Yes.
felt eager. I feel
Yes.
joyful. I feel
Oh,
joyful right now.
oh, that's great. Well, I'm glad we are able to chat with you while you're feeling joyful. That makes me joyful hearing that.
It
Um,
is joyful to talk to like-minded women,
uh,
to
thank you.
feel seen, to just to hopefully see you and respond to you so that you know that I'm hearing you and seeing you, and to be talking about something that brings hope, fills me with
Yes.
hope for the world.
Oh,
And
absolutely. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. I've started to observe, not major, but I have started to notice a shift in leadership mindset. So, when we're looking at leaders, they tend to be more profit focused, bottom line. But I've noticed now that there's a bit of a shift that they are seeing. I think EQ used to be seen as, quote, the soft skill. And I see it shifting now towards it being an essential skill, which I find heartening, long overdue. And of course, I know that, this is something in your work. Have you noticed that shift at all yourself, Robin?
I certainly have. I've also felt a hunger for it
Mm,
in a way that is very different. So every year at the center, we hold an institute for district leaders. And many times during our training, we have school leaders. In fact, we ask school leaders to be part of the implementation team when we're doing training to bring the ruler approach to schools. There's more of a hunger to embrace it now than ever
okay.
before. And obviously, the pandemic was devastating, but uh, part of the ripple effect of going through the pandemic was a realization that emotions are
Yeah.
present all day long, and you know what? We have to deal with them.
I agree. I think that's part of what it is. I just think that things that were swept under the rug are now front and center on everyone's radar. And yeah, like if we can find some things that came out of it that we can look at and say, okay, well, hopefully we can take this and learn from it, that would be great.
One of the things that I heard from leaders is that it put the relationships they have with other people, with their peers, with their teachers, at the forefront. That
Mm,
an example, one of the dearest, most wonderful, brilliant superintendents, who's now the superintendent of superintendents in Connecticut, her name is Fran Rabinowitz, talked about how that she would always keep in touch with her school leaders, and other superintendents. But during the pandemic, she made sure to be in touch even more so, and she saw the difference.
mm,
The
yeah.
people who were having those kinds of meet coming together moments had a different experience of the pandemic. It was a lot less scary and lonely to
Yes.
have a place to be like-minded with other people, or even to share your fear. Not that they weren't scared and that they
Hmm.
weren't at times alone, but it's very, very often people at the top don't have a chance to really say, I am scared. Like, this is unpredictable for me. We are out of control too. I don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, because, Heather and I will talk about our moods at the beginning and, what it means. So I guess what I would want to ask, can you tell me, I guess, so sometimes we'll say stuff like, I think the last time, normally Heather and I are in a good mood because we're excited to record. I think the last time I was having a bit of a stressful time. And so I said that, and like somebody that had listened had said, okay, great. So now what? And I think that's the part. And I noticed with the newer app that you can actually, and even before it said, do you want to maintain this mood or do you want to improve it? And now there's a little video that plays. So that was interesting. So I got to see that. I really enjoyed that. But I guess my question for you, for our listeners would be, let's say you didn't get, your mood is maybe on the low side. What does that mean, like in terms of going forward and, what can you do about it? And then as sort of the second part of that question, is there a time that you could share with us maybe where doing that yourself, the knowledge of your mood, could you tell us how maybe you approached a situation maybe differently than you would have had you not have done it?
So I think, when you can name the expression we have at the center is when you can name it, you can tame it. So when
Mm-hmm.
you can identify what you're feeling discreetly rather than just saying, I'm upset.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the beginning. You recognize that you're having a feeling. But then what just happened to create that upset? Well,
Mm-hmm.
um, so and so didn't show up. So maybe you're disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
That feel. Right. And so if you know you're disappointed, then you have a chance to address it. And there are different strategies that you can use. And in how we feel, which I had the privilege of working on from my center's end, along with Mark Brackett and Zorana Pringle, we there are many strategies that you can use
Yeah.
to address different feelings, and calming down is not necessarily always the best strategy. I mean, you
Mm.
want to calm down so that you can think clearly, because we all know that when you are activated, your frontal cortex is not working at, but optimal performance. I do use the mood meter frequently, and at this point, it's emblazoned in my head because
Yeah.
while I didn't invent the mood meter, it was there when I got there. I did build the app with Mark, so Mark and I
Right.
built the first app. I live most of the time in the green. Usually kind of chill and feel peaceful and good,
Pleasant. Yeah.
pleasant, definitely, and optimistic, positive, except when I'm worried about my children.
Mm.
So my son is 36 and my daughter is 33, but I still worry about them, and I still worry about them. And so my daughter is an adventurer, and she traveled the world quite a bit, which was wonderful, and gave me a few more than a few opportunities to use the meta moment. But I
Mm-hmm.
would say, going into a meeting and checking in with my feelings while she was studying abroad, while she was traveling around the Middle East.
Oh,
She was an sociology and Arabic major, so she spent
wow.
time in Israel and in Egypt, and at some point in Qatar when she got stuck in Egypt during the Egyptian Revolution,
Oh my.
which is a whole other conversation. But during those times, it's easy to call to mind going into a meeting and checking in with my feelings.
Yeah.
Say, okay, I'm like nervous, but it's manageable.
Right.
And so what can I do now? And sometimes what that meant is I'd take a deep breath. Sometimes what it meant is that I'd text her and just say, all okay?
Yeah.
I need to teach today, just checking in. And she was very kind and did right back.
Oh, thank
Um,
God.
and uh, so I think that for me, my go-to strategy when I'm feeling worried would
Mm-hmm.
be to check in or to check myself.
Right.
But it made a difference to even stop for the minute to think, let me check in,
Right.
rather than
That's
just continuing to ruminate. Oh my God, I hope she's okay. Like what time is it there now? Et cetera.
yeah, and I think that's the point that I was saying too about just thinking about it. And I think even just acknowledging, sometimes people are very in the here and now in that they're reacting to something that's said in a meeting and they're just trying to frame that up as to, oh, well, that person said that, so that made me angry, without considering maybe you didn't have a perfect day leading into this, right? Maybe you were worried about your child who's overseas, or, maybe you had a toddler that had a tantrum in the morning and you just were worn out and drained by the time you got to work. And I think that's where the whole like incidental emotions and integral emotions, right? So come into play. So is this actually something that's happening in the moment, or is this a carryover from something that was this morning? And I think that's what's great about the mood meters. It kind of really forces you to do that. And honestly, there's days where I don't know that I would have come to that realization if I hadn't looked at the mood meter and really thought it through, thought about how the day had gone so far. And then, yeah, then I walk into that meeting with so much more self-awareness
Mm.
than I would have without it. So I think it's amazing. Now,
Thanks.
I do have a question on the mood.
I'm glad it's helpful for you, and I appreciate your kind words because I think it can be game changing and is game changing for many people, not just to be able to know that you're feeling something, but to be able to see a palette of feelings and say, okay, no, this is not quite right, and to learn the nuances of
Mm-hmm.
feelings and to not clump it all together. We say, are you a clumper? Like, yes, you're like angry and upset, but what actually are maybe the discrete feelings that you're having? And what
Right.
is that was appealing to me when I first met Mark was the science behind that and his dedication to making sure that people were paying attention not just to the fact that they were feeling, but in fact, what were they feeling, and being able to label that and
Oh, yeah.
enhance your vocabulary.
Well,
And I mean, after all, it's about like being seen and heard. And if you can communicate accurately, then you have a much better chance.
well, that whole thing really reminds me of, and have you seen Brene Brown's book that she had, Atlas of the Heart?
Of the heart. I've heard her talk about it, yes.
Yeah, and she starts with a quote, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but the quote is sort of like the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And it's not her quote. It's, I think, I'm not even going to attempt the name, but Wittgenstein, I think is the guy's
Uh-huh.
name, Ludwig Wittgenstein. But that really, I was like, oh my God, it really sat in that. And she talked about how most people could only identify three emotions: happy, sad, angry.
Right.
And and I know there's a little bit of debate over this. She has 87 that she mentions in the book. Not everybody agrees with that. But the point is,
No, we say it's 2,000 words that describe your feeling life.
right. Okay. So isn't it crazy when you think about that? Like that we just put it down to those buckets of very basic words, and so much is missing in between. And if we had, well, the vocabulary, but also the environment and the acceptance to be able to go deep and be able to feel that, I think so many misunderstandings and hurt feelings would go away by everyone doing this. So I'm a huge proponent of using it in my line of work. And I also have to, geek out a little bit about this. So I do, I am certified in DISC. So with DISC theory, I have to ask, the whole model of DISC, the colors, the way the quadrants are set up. Do you know, in terms of ruler, was it inspired by DISC with the?
So I was not on the science team inventing the mood meter, so I'm going
Okay,
to say that up front. By the time I got there, the mood meter was in existence, but I do know it was based on the circumplex model of emotion,
okay.
and that Mark led the team to add the colors to the mood meter through research and surveys and
Okay.
science on his own.
So I guess one of my questions, I know a lot of what you do is around like educators, schools. I believe there's some stuff that you do with businesses. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess what I would ask you, and this is probably somewhat self-serving because I am more in the business end of it. So leaders tend to be very, sharp eye on results, the bottom line. And so how would you convince them that prioritizing emotional intelligence and maybe adopting the ruler approach into their work culture would be of benefit to them?
So that's an easier answer than you would think. Mark and I were part of the founding team of OG Life Lab, OJI.
Okay.
And so that is a business solution bringing emotional intelligence to organizations through emotional intelligence and other important modules now, decision making and dealing. How do you be a first time manager and
And
really.
do you find though that like a leader or people who are very much in the business world, what tends to be their reaction to it? Are you finding that they are resistant to that?
It really depends. We have nurses doing it to
Mm,
on board, leaders of nursing at Yale New Haven Hospital, at St. Jude Hospital now in Memphis, Tennessee, are using OG Life Lab, and doctors at St. Jude as well. We brought it to doctors at Yale New Haven. We work with Amazon. We work with many big companies, and the reviews are amazing. And sometimes
that's great.
people are skeptical, just like people are skeptical about emotional intelligence
Yeah,
because they say, well, like I wouldn't have gotten to where I am, leader of this organization, if I didn't already have it. So I don't need it.
right.
But in fact, what the thing that most derails people from being the leader they want, or getting the reviews they want, or getting the being able to go on and or manage people well is a lack of ability in self-regulation.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
So you may be skilled in being aware, and maybe you're skilled even in labeling your emotion.
Mm,
But if you're not skilled in regulating your emotion,
right.
then it's going to regulate you, and um, you are going to be in trouble.
Oh,
So
yes.
we're fond of saying things like, one eye roll can cost you a relationship.
Mm,
One outburst in a meeting can create a situation where you don't get a promotion.
right.
And the other piece that's lesser known and perhaps lesser talked about is it's really impossible to be creative if you don't have skills, because the creative process involves being able to take a risk. And
Right.
if you can't manage your emotions around anxiety to take a risk, if you can't manage your emotions around the disappointment when it might not work out the first
Yeah,
or the second or the third, you're likely not never to bring that creative idea forward.
that's a great point. That's a
And
really
I
good
think
point.
also that leaders who promote psychological safety
Hmm.
have the best results.
Yes.
And dysregulated groups, or groups that,
Yes.
for example, gaslight,
Yes.
people that gaslight each other, that's the opposite of psychological safety.
Well, I was just when you said that, I was like, oh, well, that's a good opportunity for me to shift gears a bit, because I know that this is definitely the direction your work has taken. With, you have a new podcast, The Gaslight Effect, which is based on your book from 2007, I believe, and I know you
I
also
know,
have a new book, which is a recovery guide. Um, can you just tell us in your own terms, I guess, for those of us who haven't heard? Now, I know gaslighting was the word of the year last year, so I think most of
but
us know it. And you must have been like, I know that. I've been talking about that since 2007. But can you just tell us, I guess, for those of us who haven't heard or aren't familiar with it, what is gaslighting?
so I'm actually going to read it right from my book.
Perfect.
Okay, so gaslighting is an insidious and sometimes covert form of emotional abuse,
Hmm.
repeated over time, and that's a really important piece of it, repeated over time,
Oh, okay.
where the abuser leads the target to question their judgments, reality, and in extreme cases, their own sanity. Gaslighting is a type of psychological manipulation in which a gaslighter, the more powerful person in the relationship, again, important because gaslighting turns around power, tries to convince you that you're misremembering,
Hmm.
misunderstanding, misinterpreting your own behavior or motivations, thus creating doubt in your mind that leaves you vulnerable and confused.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you read it because that was very nuanced, which I love so much. I think we're always trying to, paint things into a corner or like very binary. So I like that there was nuance in it. And I guess my question for you is what were you seeing in perhaps your practice or even your personal life that really prompted you to write this?
I was seeing women who were otherwise confident
Hmm.
and uh, grounded in their own reality, and good decision makers and strong minded in relationships where they gave over their power to the pairing I saw most often was a woman with a man,
Hmm.
to a man in their life. They were suddenly second guessing themselves. Well,
Mm.
maybe he's right that we don't we're not affectionate anymore because I don't travel with him on business trips and I'm not around him often enough.
Mm,
When he first told me that, I thought that was ridiculous, but he keeps insisting
mm,
that I don't know what I'm talking about. That if I traveled with him, we'd have more intimacy. If I traveled with him, things would be better.
right.
Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I don't get it.
Mm.
So I was seeing that over and over in many cases my in my practice, and I was seeing it in my friends.
Oh,
Strong
really?
women who were in other relationships, not just in their workplace, but in other relationships, not afraid to say what they think, confident about their opinion,
Mm,
second guessing themselves, feeling confused, and pointing the finger at themselves and saying, like, what's wrong with me that this isn't going
interesting. Wow. So
I
would you,
experienced it myself as well.
oh, did you?
In a not in a maniacal way. My ex-husband was not like a maniacal person like in the Gaslight movie from 1944,
Right.
where the husband was trying to drive his wife crazy so he could steal her wealth or jewels.
Yeah.
But whenever he was confronted, it would suddenly be about me. So, for example, when he was late repeatedly, and I would say to him, "You're late, and can you call, please? Just let me know. It's fine if it has to happen. I'd really appreciate it if you'd be on time. It's hurtful when I've spent all this time preparing dinner, or we're waiting
Mm.
for you, or whatever the situation." And he would always say, "You have a problem with time."
Oh,
And of course, I knew I didn't.
yeah.
And of course, when he first told me that, I said, "No, I have no problem." But over time, despite the fact that I was working on this book and on this concept, I could feel myself second guessing. And I
Mm.
and I could watch it happening. It's his certainty, right? And
Oh,
my willingness to take a step back. And there's nothing wrong with taking a step back
yeah, of
and
course.
saying, could it be me?
Yeah.
But when it's so clearly not you,
Wow.
and you keep then saying, and he keeps insisting that it is you, that it is you. It's like listening to one channel and only one
Yeah.
channel, and that's what you come to believe.
So, Robin, would you say, is there a certain personality or behavioral style that is more prone to be either a perpetrator of gaslighting or the recipient of gaslighting?
I would say no,
Okay.
no, not a personality style, but there are vulnerabilities. If you are very empathic, if you
Mm,
are very agreeable, if you are used to accommodating,
yeah.
if you want things to be peaceful,
Mm,
and you're always willing to smooth it over so it can be peaceful, you're vulnerable.
right.
If you like to be right, if it's important to you that everybody thinks the way you feel, you're more likely. And if you've seen it, if you've seen that one way to control the moment is to
Mm,
flip the table, to flip the script. So, you know, uh, I couldn't reach you today, or I haven't been able to reach you while you're away. You are so paranoid.
mm,
What is your problem? And so maybe I am paranoid, but you know what? I still couldn't reach you. Like, where were
right.
you? Right? And so if you don't like to be confronted, if you are caught in a lie, if you want to deflect, and you've learned that that works, one of the reasons people do gaslighting is that it works. And I hope you'll come on my podcast.
Oh my gosh, I would love to.
Yay.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yes. So the question I was going to ask you is, when you're describing gaslighting, would you say, because can gaslighting show up, in the workplace? So I could see it with like a one off or one person, but can a whole culture in an office be about gaslighting from the leadership down. Have you ever seen that, or is that a
Yes,
possibility?
I have. And yes, it's a possibility. So you feel like, wait a minute, like there's something going on here. There's something wrong. Or you realize that by stepping out of your culture and going into another culture, and this happens in families too, that you've been living in a way that you accept it as the air you breathe. This is just the way things run in
Mm,
an organization, and then you step aside and maybe not, or more usual things are going on. You're noticing that certain people are suddenly getting invited to meetings and you're not. You sense, you just sense something is different, and you
yeah.
say to your supervisor, you know something going on, or we having organizational changes, and they say, no, 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 maybe
Hmm.
you're a little stressed out right now. Maybe you need to
Yeah.
take time off.
Right.
And then turns out
Mm,
you were stressed out, but there was still those things going on.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I totally see that. Okay, final question for you. Thank you so much for your time.
And I
Um,
just want to make a point
yeah.
that, or make the point that, you know, in telling these stories, sometimes, we're smiling together because we're in recognition that this is happening. But in life, in the day to day of it, gaslighting can be soul destroying,
Mm,
and it is not at all funny. And sometimes I catch myself like I just did now, yeah, so you think that people are saying these things to you, and it's kind of absurd, and we can all recognize that. But when you're going through it, you can feel like you're crazy
oh
because
yeah.
something is going on, and that is something that I want to leave our listeners.
Yeah.
When you aren't comfortable because you feel like there's something going on, there is
Yes.
something going on. And you may not know exactly what it is, but trust your
Trust your
intuition.
instincts.
Yeah,
Yeah, that inner voice.
that inner voice.
Definitely. Okay, so my final question for you, Robin, is is there anything you could say to our listeners who may be either experiencing it right now in a work or a personal relationship? And is there any advice you have to even perhaps preventing it from happening in the first place?
Well, that's not a simple 1-minute question. So I would say definitely listen to my podcast, buy the
Yes.
Gaslight Effect recovery book, but listen to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and be brave enough. Get to a point where you have gathered your resources, that you feel safe, you have a place to go if you have to leave, you have social support, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and be brave enough to say to yourself, if this doesn't stop, I have to leave. Or if this
Right.
doesn't stop, I can't leave, but I'm going to limit as much as I possibly can
Yes.
interactions with this person. And begin to take care of yourself and to do things for yourself that remind you that you do know how to think clearly, that remind you that you do have agency. Take a step away, even if it's go out for a cup of coffee every day by yourself, so that
Right.
you have a moment to get back to that inner voice.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Honestly, it was a true pleasure to have you. I'm so excited because they said, when I said to Heather, "Oh my gosh, she worked on the mood meter. This is what we talk about. This is right in my wheelhouse." So it was really an honor to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was an honor to be here, and as I said, joyful, really joyful
Aw,
to be with both of you. And we'll reach out to you from my team to invite you on the podcast, and continue using How We Feel, because it is really a fantastic app
it
and
is.
a game changer. And thank you so much for all the work you do
Thank
to
you.
to keep people safe and healthy, and pursuing well-being in their own lives.